Mr. White was on the faculty when I came to Alabama as a piano major in 1983, and he was always very approachable and kind to everyone, not just his own students, but he sort of knew everyone by name, and I knew from word on the street that he was a pretty big deal. I was very intimidated by him. He's, 7 feet tall. Mrs. White's about 6.5. But he was always very kind to me, and I ended up doing some accompanying for his students. And when we got in there, I think it was a Schumann song, and he said, "Scoot over, let me show you how to do this." And he sat down and he showed me, and he's a fabulous pianist on top of everything else.
Mr. White has influenced every aspect of my singing and teaching career. He was the first teacher that I had who actually made me understand the technical aspects of singing, the actual details of how the voice works, and how to make it work for me.
I was a student at the University of Alabama when he came. So now I greatly admired him. He sang very well. His students admired him greatly. Not being gifted with a very fine voice, to get to know him and the way he worked a bit better, I would often volunteer to accompany his students.
It was so much fun to work with staging operas and things of that nature, and the jokes were always funny. My favorite memory of him, I think, has to be with Amal and the Night Misters, when he was telling us about the door. And he said, "The door swings, as we say in the opera, out."
And then I got to know him on a different level when I came to audition for the job of director of music here at First Pres. He and Karen, who was she was my voice teacher when I finally came around to singing, they were in the choir. And I had a little joke that prepared, to see, just to lighten the moment when I was warming up the choir at my audition. And I said, "Do you ever have one of those stress dreams where you're auditioning for a choir job and your two major voice professors are in the choir?" And thank goodness the choir laughed, and they laughed, and they could not have been more gracious. And they've had to be that gracious with all kinds of people standing up there telling them how to sing. So it takes a special person to take that well and to be supportive, and both he and Karen could not have been kinder and more supportive.
Every now and then, Ed and I would go have coffee or lunch, and he shared with me and encouraged me in my career how to think on the larger musical scene, and I will always appreciate that.
I went to University of Alabama for my master's, and that's where I met Ed White, and it was such a blessing to be with a teacher who could not only immediately hear and diagnose what was going on with your voice, but also give you 15 different ways to make it better. He was amazing like that, and I strive every day in my teaching to honor that aspect of his teaching. He was invested in his students, and he really he gave all of us meaningful and attainable goals, and through this progression of attainable goals, we ended up people who actually understood what it was to sing well.
Much of what Mr. White taught me I still use every day. And even preparing Naaman, I'm thinking of Mr. White and finding ways to create extensions in the upper voice. And I'm remembering our work we did on raising the soft palate.
Well, when Mr. White died in late 2020, a lot of people started coming forward and asking about how can we honor him, what can we do? And it's not uncommon for people to commission an anthem at church in memory of someone or for an occasion. And so we thought about that, and we've worked with Lee Scott a lot on these commissions, and the church has before I got here as well. But then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, this is someone who's had such far-reaching influence, not only at church, but in many other ways. At church, he's been a faithful member of the choir for many years. He served as a deacon. He's much loved, not just in the choir, but by the whole congregation. Also, he's had a great career as a pedagogue. He not only taught at UA, he taught at Florida State, he taught at DePaul and Indiana, and he's got students all over the world, which leads to his legacy. I mean, he's got students teaching and sharing his technique, which is just pure gold. all over not only this country but internationally as well. He had a great career as a singer. He and Karen, his wife, met at Eastman School of Music, which is no small deal. They both had significant careers as opera singers in Germany. And I'm not sure that the folks in Tuscaloosa ever really understood how big a deal that was. So someone with that kind of far-reaching influence, I thought, there needs to be something bigger than just an anthem, something more substantial. So I spoke with Lee Scott, and we came up with a chancel opera.
I first learned about this chancel opera being commissioned in honor of Ed White at his memorial service, actually. And even though the occasion was very sad, I was really pleased that he was being honored in this way.
Producer is a brand new term for me to own, but I'm learning a lot along the way. First of all, casting. We wanted to use Mr. White's former students in the main roles, or people that had studied with him, whether it was in school or independently. So tracking these folks down, they're all over the country. They're hard to track down and get their time free, and everyone zero in on the date, and the rehearsals, putting it together in a week before. So that's a challenge. The people we've hired for the 12-member orchestra, chamber orchestra, are also busy professionals. So I was really, really happy with the ensemble we've been able to put together for that.
My friend Margie Johnston and Lee Scott were talking about this opera that they were doing. They asked me about if I would be interested in doing the role. And of course, I would be interested in doing the role, and I'm sure it's at that time I was sure that it was going to be a wonderful opera that Lee was putting together, and it's always fun people to work with at Mr. White's church at First Pres.
I take a lot of pride in working for a church that puts outreach at such a high level and highly values that. And so this is a way that we can show some outreach by this commission. This piece will be done for decades, for centuries to come, and it'll have the name First Presbyterian Church Tuscaloosa on it.
When I was a student, I was a sort of a hired soloist here. It was here that I sang for the first time Mendelssohn's He Watching Over Israel, which is based on Psalm 121, and I use that in the opera. And in my own mind, I like to think of it referring back to my experiences long, long ago when I sang here.
Here's this unique, biblically based, profound work that we will be associated with, and I'm very proud of that, and I'm happy to have a church that supports this kind of thing. I'm also happy to have a really meaningful piece that will honor Mr. White in such a good way.
It meant a lot to me that his legacy will live on not only through the students that he taught and the students that they in turn will teach, but also this opera being commissioned was a wonderful thing.